As usual, before we begin, I'd like to thank everyone for posting their questions and making this video possible. Okay, let's get started. Was the mob weaker when you left it than when you joined it? Is it a continuing decline in power and money year by year? During the initial stages, after my induction, I quickly came to realize what I've been told about the sad state of the mob. Capable guys were rare, and those who were capable, understandably, didn't want to get in any trouble or go back to prison. As far as earning money, everybody was chasing the same dollar. Is the situation presently the same, or has it gotten progressively worse? I would have to say, from what I've seen, I believe the mob is going steadily downhill. Why do you think Anthony Senna was granted parole and will be released next year, but guys like Vic Arena, who's 89 with serious health problems, is considered a danger to society? For starters, Anthony Senna was sentenced in 1989 to life in prison. Since then, he served 35 years on that sentence, but was sentenced under the old law. Conversely, Vic Arena received 3 life sentences plus 85 years after his conviction in 1992 under the new law. Why a guy like Anthony Senna gets granted parole and Vic Arena gets denied compassionate release? I don't know the specific answer, other than Vic Arena was a boss while he was in the street. The BOP website has Senna being released as early as June 2024. Are guys expected to give an envelope at a wedding? The answer is yes, and just like anyone who's invited to a wedding, you give an envelope. But at times, everyone in the crew will put money together in one envelope and they'll hand that in. Before I get to this next question, I'll apologize for laughing when I read it. Did MABE members that you knew have common medical conditions? Naturally, the answer is, of course. And the reason why is when they were straightened out, they became a member of a family, not a superhuman. Did you know all the members of the Lucchese family, or were you introduced by another member? Were there guys that you never met? I knew some of the members in the family, but had to be formally introduced to everyone. However, there were guys I never met, and it's not uncommon not to meet every single member in a family. Did you feel monitored by Big John's cigar vault? Well, it wasn't so much as feeling we were being surveilled, but rather knowing we were. Anytime you have members of a family, and in this case the Brooklyn faction, meeting in one place, the FBI is going to carry out surveillance. I always felt it was a sign of poor leadership in Big John, because there was no reason to put us on display like that. Instead of being smart, or rather insulating himself, he should have protected our crew as well. And I'll say it again, the next time the word captain could be equated to Big John is if he buys a boat. Apparently, there are 2 Tony Muscatellos, the one you know well and the other one. Are they related? And what's the latest status of Tony getting a new trial? There are 2 Tony Muscatellos, both from Howard Beach. The one I know is now in his early 80s, and the other one's much younger, and they're not related. As far as the status on Tony's case, there will be no new trial because he pled guilty and served a little more time and has since been released. God bless him. What was the reputation of Nicky Scarfo Jr. in the Lucchese family? As most people know, after he was shot 9 times with a MAC-10 at Dante and Luigi's restaurant on October 31st, 1989, Nicky Jr. was transferred to the Lucchese family and straightened out. His time as a Lucchese member only lasted until 2011, when he was indicted for embezzling millions of dollars from First Plus Financial Group. By the time I became a member 2 years later, he was already in prison. But my childhood friend and fellow member, Joey DiBenedetto, told me that he liked Nicky Jr. In fact, Nicky Jr. tried getting Joey involved in what he was doing, but wisely Joey declined. I'll say this, had the Philly mob been run by Nicky Jr., you would see a much more organized and respected family. Are you familiar with the process where a Sicilian mafia member transfers to American Cosa Nostra, which involves a letter of introduction from Sicily to their American counterparts? This is true. I've mentioned in the past, any member of Sicilian Cosa Nostra that comes here to the United States, although his status in Sicily is respected, he has to be inducted into a family here. And technically, until this takes place, he can't do any business with members here. I would like to ask, during life in the mob, is there a captain as well as an acting captain? And how is the money kicked up? Is money that's kicked up to a captain split with the acting captain? Typically, a captain of a crew will have one of the members of that crew be his acting captain. Our crew never had an official acting captain, like every other Lucchese crew, because our captain Big John's in security. As to how money's carved up between a captain and his acting, Depends on what that captain wants or has worked out with his acting. Did any of the other three families have a Sicilian faction comparable to the Gambinos and Bananos? I'm not sure about the Colombos of the West Side. Naturally, they had Sicilian members, but I'm not sure if they had a Sicilian faction. As for the Lucchese family, we had Paolo Loduca, who was a captain in a family from Sicily, and the family used as a liaison with the Gambino Sicilian faction. Do wise guys act tough with their guys, or do they carry themselves with class? This person claims years ago he had a run-in with the Tanglewood boys, who acted tough with him, but when he seen them alone, they were respectful. Here's my answer. If a wise guy has to act tough, what does that say about him? You're either a tough guy or you're not. And unfortunately, some guys become ballsy when they're around their friends. But when you catch them alone, their true colors come out. When Gotti met with Gigante and told him that he inducted his son John Jr., do you think that was a strange thing to divulge? Personally, I think it was more about Gotti boasting about his son being straightened out and foolishly believing that Chin, being an old school gangster, would appreciate it. He was mistaken, and as most of us know, Chin gave him a classic response, not the one Gotti was expecting. Gee, I'm sorry to hear that. If a New York member wishes to move with his family to another state, is he out of luck? How is it possible? Certain members have been permitted to move out of state, and this doesn't mean that they're no longer in a life. A lot of guys right now are living in Florida, with permission, of course. After the gentrification of East Harlem, a lot of old school Italian residents were displaced. How did this affect the mob operating in that area? I don't believe it had much effect. A lot of the guys who grew up in East Harlem at some point didn't live there anymore, but kept social clubs there and continued to conduct business. What would you have done work-wise if you didn't end up in that life? Did you have aspirations of going further in education or some kind of profession? Well, I did take classes and eventually become a senior manager in construction. What's the best advice Johnny Santori gave you? And the same question for Tony Muscatello. Johnny Santori would always tell me, don't do anything that risks your freedom unless you have stacks of money to come home to. When I got in trouble in 1989, he asked me if it was worth it and told me that this was a loss. Tony Muscatel advised me to stay away from the person who would become the victim in the 1989 case and said, stay away from this kid because you're going to wind up killing him. Advice I unfortunately didn't take. And one day while visiting me in Fishkill, he told me I'd like to punch you in the face for not taking his advice. The advice and things I learned from both of them throughout the years was invaluable. Quickly, if you take a look underneath the video, you'll see the Super Thanks icon put there for anyone who wants to show their appreciation. And for the last question, Johnny Santori and Mikey DeSantis are two interesting people who seem similar to me. Can you please compare and contrast them? Let me start out by saying, besides being in the life and both being capable guys, that's where the comparability ends. No one, and I repeat, no one could have ever went to Johnny Santori and labeled the guy without paperwork. In addition, John couldn't be influenced by anyone. He was his own man, and anyone who knew him knew that. But more importantly, had John been alive, his face would have been the last thing the people who spread that false wire would have seen before they left this earth. So in my opinion, Mikey couldn't shine Johnny Santori's shoes.